With that, we're very lucky to have Sharon Megdal with us today. She is the director of the University of Arizona Water Resources Research Center. And we've asked her to be our opening speaker in order to put everything we're doing into context with a focus on water. So if you could please welcome Sharon, and we'll get started on her day.
So good morning, everybody. I have a mic, so I think I'll be picked up both here and on the Zoom. And it's my pleasure to be here with you. I titled my talk, One Water, One Health, One Earth, and toward the end of it, you'll maybe understand why I titled it that way. So I am director of the Water Resources Research Center. It's a very old center that we were established in 1964. We're a federally authorized center. We get a very limited amount of federal funding every year to support water research and education information transfer. And we're a part of Cooperative Extension in the Division of Agriculture, Life, and Veterinary Sciences and Cooperative Extension, which is a mouthful. And we're very outward looking. We really bridge the real world with the academic community and so forth. And you can read about what we do. I do want to mention throughout this presentation, here and there I have QR codes, because one of the things we do like to do is have people know where they can find our information. We have a lot of good information on our website, and we do good programs, webinars, and the like. So, afterwards, I don't know if you're going to post these, but please connect with us, and I'll invite you again at the end. So I had a little trouble framing this talk. First of all, I had to find out what One Health was, right? I mean, we're a big campus, big university, and what is this One Health? And then even this morning, and they're my witnesses, I said, I got to come up and read those little words because I've been taking things off the website and just, putting graphics down. And so obviously most of you here in the room know that what One Health is. And, it covers everything. I mean, if you read the words around each of those little graphics, it really covers everything. Your pets, you, everything. So, Kelly, when you were talking about, what you do, it's like, almost anybody could fit in this realm of work. And I started thinking about, so what is your framework, and what do I do in 30 minutes? So what I thought I would do is just tell you about my framework as somebody who works on water policy and management. And I'm going to go through a lot of things pretty quickly, and several of them each could be an hour-long talk, or a whole day's talk, or a multi-day conference. So I'm going to go pretty quickly and hope it makes some sense. My background, by the way, is I'm trained as an economist, but maybe 30 years or more ago, I kind of fell into water and gravitated away from disciplinary economics, which, anybody ever take a graduate course in economics here in the room? See, this is not an economics grad, which is good, nothing wrong with that. But my joke is, and you would understand this, I don't write in Greek letters anymore. Lots of equations, lots of statistical analysis. My work now is very institutional in looking at kind of the policy aspects and management aspects. So I don't think, I've looked around. I think one of my students this semester is going to be here today, but I don't see her yet. So I was just hoping not too many of you have heard me speak before, because some of the slides are familiar, but if you have, but others are not. But I teach a graduate class every spring, so we just finished, called Water Management and, Water Policy in Arizona and Semi-Arid Regions. And so it's a very policy-oriented class. It's cross-listed in 5 schools or departments. It doesn't have any disciplinary requirements. And I've had students from the College of Public Health there in all different areas. It's a graduate seminar type class with some lectures and a research paper. And so a couple of these slides I'm going to show you here are slides that I use at the beginning of the semester. So first of all, what is policy? And policy is very general. It's really a guiding set of principles. It could be law, it could be, in the law, it could be your own personal policies. Like before cell phones, but even now, I don't typically drive by myself between Phoenix and Tucson at night. all right? That's a policy. Nobody says I can't do it, and I can violate that policy if I so choose, and I sometimes so choose. And it could be a group, it could be company, and the like. So that's what a policy is. Now, something I'm not going to say that much about after I say these words is a governance. So water is life. Okay, let's remember that. That's a very historical, indigenous, it's said in very many languages, and of course it is, and we know that. Because water is omnipresent, it permeates everything, including us, it's about people in many ways, and it's certainly about people making those policy choices and decisions that govern how we manage, and management is one of the kind of sub-themes of today, and we'll hear some talks. And so governance really is the framework of laws, regulations. It's not just the who does what is part of it. And then there's a question of management. So what is management? And in the water field, if you talk to hydrologists, they'll talk about water management and policy almost interconnectedly. But in the water scene, it's really, in my view, what decisions people make based on that governance framework. So like we have laws or regulations relating to recharging of water in aquifers with permitting requirements and protection requirements, but there's nothing saying you must recharge Central Arizona project water before you use it. But some make that choice for different reasons, and those are the management decisions. So that's a little bit of my framework. And then it's really important to remember what we see on the ground in terms of water policy and management reflects so many different things. And here I have a list, and these first 3 or 4 slides I use in my class each year, but the one I show you here I use in many talks that I give. And I give a lot of lectures to community groups, ranging to international conferences and international audiences, including related to UNESCO and the UN. And you have to just remember that what you see happening depends on many things, and I underline a few, because the legal framework has a lot to do with what we see, and also kind of whether things are centralized or decentralized. Who's setting the guidelines for what you do? Sometimes it's at a national level, like drinking water quality, but then sometimes it's very local. It could be how do you manage groundwater? It's left to the states, and some states leave it to local communities. So these things are all very important. And so context is very important. And so what are some of the contexts? All right, the water cycle context. I don't know, most of you scientists and the like, you know about water cycle. We all learned about it in grade school or middle school. And this is a cartoon-like graphic that we've prepared at the Water Center and we've used for a long time. Now, this issue of connecting the natural environment to people, that's part of the One Health, right? And the water cycle, it's very interesting. I thought I'd share with you that this is a new graphic that the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, just prepared. It's like maybe less than a year old. I'm not sure what the actual year. And they're very, very excited and proud about it. And that's great, they should be. But one of the reasons they're so proud of it and excited about it is that it includes people. It includes activities of people. It's not just the physical thing, the evaporation and the rain and all that. And so our little graphic, which we've had for years, shows different things going on, farms and people. But they're very happy that now they show domestic water use, municipal water use, industrial water use. That wasn't there before. That's influencing the cycle. And then I put this second, but they've got agriculture and grazing. So they've got animals, and agricultural activities, part of your One Health framework. But that wasn't there before. And so people are realizing that, hey, we need to think about this in a broader way, because humans and animals affect what's going on in the water cycle and vice versa, right? So another context is the geographic and jurisdictional context. Where are we talking about? Who are the jurisdictions? What are their authorities and so forth? What are their overlaps? So on your left is a map of the Colorado River Basin, where we are located. prepared by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. I'm not going to get into details about all that. I can answer questions if you have it, but the map on the right shows essentially the same boundaries from the perspective of indigenous nations. The states are less important to them. Their boundaries are important to them, and their boundaries may span multiple states. So how you look at things and how you approach things will depend upon that geographic and jurisdictional context. And then here are just a couple of other maps, because we're here in Arizona. As I mentioned, I give international talks, and a lot of people don't know where Arizona is, right? So showing where we are, most people know where California is. And so showing where we are and showing that we share a border with Mexico. Of course, we share a border with Indian nations. When it comes to groundwater, which is, provides over 40% of the water used in Arizona, we've got different approaches to how it's managed. And that graphic on the right, when people hear this, they're sometimes surprised, even though they may have been born in Arizona and lived here their entire lives or moved here and lived here for a long time. But that map to the right shows land ownership in the state of Arizona. And less than 20% of the land in Arizona is privately held land. The rest of it is federal lands. It could be forests and Bureau of Land Management lands. And then, of course, we have the tribal lands. We have state lands. And so that factors into a lot of things in terms of water policy and management and what's going on. Now, the last context, which I'm going to spend a little bit of time, is the wicked water problems context. How many of you have heard of wicked problems? Some of you have, most of you have not. I was introduced to this back in about 2016, maybe a little earlier, when the Water Center runs a conference and we had a guest speaker. And this is something that started out in like the systems analysis work back maybe in the 70s or before. Wicked problems are problems that are big problems. You don't have a single solution that you get to. You sometimes will never solve them, and you work toward mitigating them and improving on the situation. And there's lots of reasons why you have those problems. And some of them are listed here, but you may have conflicting views. You may have lack of information. There could be large economic burden. But the last bullet there on the interconnected nature of them to other problems, which could be geopolitics, poverty, climate change. And so that's why you may think you're making improvement, but then you can maybe only get to a certain point before you have to look at better pathways. And something very important to this is that collaboration and interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary work are really needed for this, for addressing and identifying pathways to solutions. So I'm going to very quickly go over 4 problems I want to point out. And every one of these, like I said, we could spend a lot of time on. So wicked problem, water problem, example 1. Colorado River water demand supply imbalance. Now, this is something getting international attention. I mean, I can't tell you how many interviews I've done and how many interviews I haven't done, because you can't just spend your whole life doing interviews. But this is something that everybody should know, that Colorado River water supply is diminishing because of climate change, aridification, mega drought, whatever you want to call it. At the same time, demands are increasing, also sometimes due to warming temperatures, but growing populations and the like. And so this is a photo I took when leaving Las Vegas. I had this great view to take that photo. And what's interesting about that photo is somebody who is from Tucson and using this photo, I think it may be in the forthcoming UA alumni magazine, I'm not sure if he decided to use it or not, said, "What are those lakes?" Now, if you know about our area, that's Lake Mead. That is one big storage reservoir that's at about 27, 28% of capacity there. And a lot of those brown areas would be, they're always brown. It's not like it's one beautiful area of blue water, but there's so much brown that could be blue, showing water if it were full, like it was about the late 1999s, 2000. And so this is, again, a big problem. What do we do about it? Tons of people working on it, lots of science going on, and so forth. And because it's so complicated, it involves so many people, 40 million people depend on this, 7 states, Mexico, tribal nations, and the like. You know, we're kind of inching towards solutions. Problem number 2, lack of access to water and sanitation. I would think would be of interest to a number of people here in the room. We know that with COVID, there was a lot of attention paid to this. It's a chronic problem. This has been a problem for a long time, but because of COVID and the high incidence of COVID, particularly in the Navajo Nation, but other communities, got a lot of attention. There's a Sustainable Development Goal 6 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, about universal access to water, clean water and sanitation. I started even thinking about what do we mean by clean, right? A lot of you folks are working on what's in that water, and people have lots of questions about what's clean and what we don't know about the water as well as what we do. And there's an initiative that came out of the Water and Tribes initiative, which is a collaboration. I'm on their leadership team on this, and so there's lots of good information on it. That photo on the left is a photo one of our graduate students at the University of Arizona Department of Environmental Science took of a watering station. But this is an example of a problem that clearly, if you think about income levels and multi-generational housing, and if you think about the Navajo Nation, about the size of West Virginia, anybody know how many supermarkets they have in all of the Navajo Nation? 13 is what I've heard the former president say. So think about an area the size of West Virginia with 13 supermarkets. It's a food desert. People have to travel to get their water, get their food, long distances. So when you think about what to do to solve, and there's quite a bit of new money going into this recently through some of the federal legislation, but these are big issues to solve. They're not going to get solved very quickly. Another one has to do with given to nature's water needs. And again, you have the environment broadly construed as part of One Health. We know the water is needed to sustain our natural environment, our riparian areas, but sometimes we have very little understanding of how much water, when is the water needed. And so the delta, the mouth of the Colorado River pretty much gets no water. And I use that as an example here. In this photo here, I put up the link. That's in about the middle of a 10-minute beautiful photo about video about the pulse flow that was done in 2014 to try to get water to the mouth of the river, which it did. The video is narrated by Robert Redford, and there's this beautiful little girl in the middle of it. Now, I just want to tell you a real quick story. How am I doing on time? Because I'm talking fast. But
you have 11 minutes.
11 minutes, okay. Little tip that I tell my students and other people, number your slides. I'm on slide 14. I have 26, so I'm okay. But that's one of the reasons I number my slides. I showed the first 5 minutes and 35 seconds of this video at an international conference about the Jordan River, which has lots of issues. And that was in 2014, and I've run into some people who have seen me since and said, that was a wonderful talk. We love that talk and whatever. You know why they remember that talk? They remember that talk because of that photo of the little girl. That's a little girl playing in what's usually a dry riverbed like our Santa Cruz River is, and Rito, because there's water there. And that's why people think I gave a great talk, because they remember that beautiful little girl. And I encourage you to watch the video. It's really uplifting. All right, and then problem number 4 is the invisibility of groundwater. And that's just, you don't solve that. That's just a fact. And but what it means is it takes a lot of work, a lot of science, a lot of research to understand quantity situation, quality situation. If the quality is impacted, it can be harder to clean up than surface water and the like. And we have some real issues with this in our own state here in Arizona. That graphic is a graphic from the Arizona Department of Water Resources water model showing that the water's not there, groundwater, and where it is tends to be very, very deep. Governor Hobbs just 3 days ago, announced she's forming a water policy council. Governor Ducey had multiple water policy councils, but for this real purpose of looking at what we're doing, what we're maybe doing right, but what we're not doing in terms of groundwater management. I've been appointed to that, and I'm pleased to serve. At the UN Water Conference, again, I've tried to, in kind of what I put up here, to connect with a lot of you as scientists and researchers and the like, and saying, these are things that are recognized. You need data, you need innovation, capacity development, finance governance, and then I add engagement. Those 5 themes were the 5 themes of one of the panels at the UN Water Conference, and I circled me. You could hardly see me there, but I moderated the governance part of that panel. But I also show that picture, I'll tell you why, in 2 slides. All right, so lots about the problems, but really the work is on solutions, right? What do we do to address these problems? And so process is really important to the pathways to solutions. I list things. Some of these things you may think, well, of course, but sometimes you don't have something in place, like collaborative mechanisms. We have a very good mechanism at the border with the US and Mexico to deal with some water issues. We have a good mechanism at the US-Canada border. They tend not to know each other or talk to each other very much. Some of them met recently at the UN Water Conference. But in other areas of the world where I've done some work, Israel, Jordan, Palestine area, there aren't functioning mechanisms. They may have them named on the books, but they don't necessarily function. So here are some things there. And then one of them that came up is like, okay, what's contributed to working together binationally? This was at a conference, and they said, eat with your partners. That happened to be said at November 2019, right? And we all know what happened in March 2020. And for a long time, we haven't been able to eat with our partners. And my view of this is Zoom is great if you already know people and you have relationships, but it's a little harder when you haven't established those. And now we're back to eating with our partners. Okay, so, and then recognizing the importance of inclusive processes. So the picture I want to show you is this one on the bottom right. This was a session on the role of Indigenous people in governing shared waters. I co-convened that with the Water and Tribes Initiative for the Colorado River Basin. I showed you that other big, huge room. A lot of these official side events at the UN were in these tiny rooms, and there was not only standing room only, but it was like seating on the floor only, because we were in these much, much smaller rooms. And there is Secretary Deb Haaland, the first Indigenous person to be on U.S. President's cabinet. She's the Secretary of Interior. She kicked off the program, and it was very well received. Other things about water diplomacy. All right, solutions, options. Again, I put this in here if anybody wants to look. It's an article that I published now, when was that? About a year ago, in May or June, looking at what are the solutions. I was asked to write this article. Again, this is kind of some of what I do, is a lot of things don't get written in the literature, right? The agencies are not publishing in peer-reviewed journals, and we need to have, of course, peer-reviewed journals for the researchers and so forth. But a lot of stuff just gets talked about and not written. So I, last spring, got a couple of invitations, so I wrote about some of the solutions. And what are some of the categories I talked about? Conservation, greater efficiency in water use, water reuse, and conservation and efficiency are not necessarily the same thing. Just if anybody's interested, we can talk about that later. Water reuse, I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. Water storage, water banking. I show a photo there. That's from the Gila River Indian community. Desalination, which is an example of augmentation, increasing our water supply. Moving water, that's been getting a lot of attention. Should we desalinate water in Mexico, move it up to Arizona? Should we take Missouri, Mississippi water, move it to Arizona? In fact, there's a new podcast series from NPR Colorado called Parched. The 3rd episode was just this week about this idea of the boldest idea of all, taking floodwater from the Midwest and moving it. What about marketing and other mutually agreed upon transactions? Rainwater, stormwater capture, and designing the built environment. These are just some of the ones that we talk about. So let me just say a few words about water reuse. What am I down to? I'm down to my 5, thank you. Because I realize I'm looking there, but she's there with the timer. But most of you, I think, know, and you're going to hear, later on today about some matters relating to water reuse. But historically, we've used it here, in Arizona and the Southwest, a lot for turf irrigation, a little bit for agriculture. In other parts of the world, like Israel, a lot of, maybe 50% of the water used by the agricultural sector there is reclaimed water. It's done through storage and recovery, so those are basins storing the reclaimed water. I like to show this slide because you see IKEA, you see Coca-Cola. I'm going to give you the answer. Where is this? People say, oh, Phoenix, because they know we have an IKEA. But no, that's south of Tel Aviv, where they're doing very large-scale treatment through soil aquifer treatment, staying underground, using an environmental buffer, and then piping it out, pumping it out, and delivering it through purple pipe. That's a little too many P's for me for early in the morning here. But then indirect potable reuse. So it's been discharged with permits and the like into rivers and so forth, and we have permits to reuse it indirectly because it meets drinking water quality standards. But then this whole idea of direct potable reuse, DPR, where it goes through treatment and gets right into the pipes that go to people's homes, and there's a lot going on about that. Of course, lots of questions, and they abound. Okay, so let me get back to my title in my last couple of minutes here about One Water. So One Water is something that the water industry, a lot of the water utilities are talking about. And Tucson Water and Tucson, the city, have a big One Water initiative going on. Has anybody engaged with that? I have to admit, I've not had the time to myself, but I get the emails about it. But it's a really very significant undertaking. This is taken from their website. And what I put on the right, all water moves through a continuous renewable cycle of use and reuse. It's all one water, whether it's surface water, groundwater, recycled water, and the idea is to plan for it all and consider it a single resource. Not the effluent gets thrown away. We don't want that. That used to be the case, not that many years ago. But now everything is valuable. So One Earth, sometimes I will say water's local. Groundwater is very local. We move water from one place to another and it becomes a local source. But the issues that we're dealing with are global issues, the same sorts of questions and needs for research, same kind of environmental questions. But also, I put up a couple clippings about that one on the bottom left, a climate solution that spies worry could trigger war. There's talk, we've already been doing weather modification. There's talk about doing some different things. And there's worry that what you do in one area to affect the water availability could affect other areas. And then, the seeding clouds I mentioned. I show a picture there of Yuma that I took just a couple weeks ago because the food part of this is just critically important and large and global. And then One Health. And this is your stuff. So I'm just going to put these on because I'm running out of time. But these are just some of my thoughts about this One Health. We need to be interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary. But there's so much work to be done, and we're all so busy. I was thinking about it. Some of you may have read this week or so. In the last week, there was talk about how loneliness is like a really public health problem. I think busyness is. I think we're doing so much and working so hard, and yet we're still, as broad as we are, we're still siloed because we don't have the time. And that's just the challenge, and we need to figure out how to work together. So I'm going to close with just a statement that I wrote for this. I mean, it's probably said it in similar ways, but about 3 important P's. I want to underscore the importance of the people, which I mentioned earlier, because the people are the ones who affect the policies that determine what we can do and not do. And so it's all people, process, and policies. And this little slide, nothing about us without us, was said by someone about indigenous people. They've been not had their voice heard, they've been ignored, and it's like, stop doing things that affect us without consulting us. And I think that would go for a lot of people. So with this, I just want to mention we have an annual conference. What can we do? Solutions to Arizona's water challenges. We also will have some out-of-state speakers. We're going to have, it's going to be at the Student Union. We'll have free streaming. If anybody wants to know more about it, sign up for a weekly wave. And with that, I thank you. And I was pretty close to my 30 minutes. So I think.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon, for all the alliteration. Does anybody have questions? We have time for questions.
Since you're an economist, I wanted to ask you about how the pricing of water is going to change in the near future as we deal with scarcity and climate change.
So questions about pricing, they're really important. We tend not to include the scarcity value of water, the value of the water molecule itself, in water pricing in most instances. So for example, Tucson Water, very representative of water utilities, they look at how much does it cost to extract, treat, deliver, all those things. But there's nothing saying, oh, you're using that water molecule of groundwater, it's fossil groundwater, it's not going to be there. So what's the intrinsic value of that? Economics teaches that if you don't have perfect markets and so forth, you price according to your next best alternative. But we don't tend to do that. Some people get all their water from groundwater and their pricing and what they pay for water depends on that. And then there are other people who may pay a lot more. And even if you look within Tucson, take a look at, those of you who know where Winter Haven is, they're going to pay way, way less for water than Tucson Water customers do. But what is going to answer your question, prices will go up because the cost is going up, and the cost is going up for multiple reasons, some of which may be intuitive, and then others you have to stop and say, oh yeah, that makes sense, but I didn't think about that. We have to develop additional supplies. If we're going to reuse highly treated wastewater for drinking water, that's expensive to treat. That is going to cost us more. But it's still going to cost us less, most likely, than desalinated seawater. If we're going to move water, that's going to be costly. The part that may not be so intuitive is, if you look at what's going on with the Central Arizona project and cutbacks, is that a lot of the cost of delivered water from the Central Arizona project is the cost of the infrastructure, the cost of electricity, the cost of pumping it. And so sometimes as less is delivered, then the cost goes up because they have to cover those fixed costs over fewer units sold. So cities like Tucson, Phoenix, and others may be having to raise our rates. And in fact, I'm not sure if they've included an adjuster for Central Arizona project water because that's going up because there's less of it to deliver. Not necessarily because the direct costs of delivery are going up. But I'll just give you one example of what could be done is if we had a more holistic approach. And this is a case in Israel, which is, their population is about 10 million, the land area is about the size of New Jersey, but they have the government, the state of Israel owns all water, they manage it, they price it, they allocate it. And so when they integrated desalination into their water portfolio in the early mid-2000s, and that continues on to this day, prices went up for everyone because they're all kind of one system. So if Tucson Water were serving to the whole state, then if they had increased costs, it would go up for the whole state. But that's typically not what happens. So it will go up, but the reasons for it may vary, and the rate at which it will go up will vary. We'll wait for the microphone.
This will be brief. What role do you see, speaking of prices, for carbon pricing, cap and trade, and that approach to the bigger picture of global climate crisis?
That's a broad question about carbon pricing and so forth. I don't know the answer to that because I think that's a developing area. President Robbins established a commission on the future of food, agriculture and food production in a drying environment. I'm one of 10 people on that commission. And not by the commission, but there was just a 3-day workshop up at Biosphere 2 on agrivoltaics, this concept of using solar panels to generate electricity, but also provide cover for plants to increase the productivity of the agricultural process. And also that agricultural process may cool the solar panels. And in that context, in those 3 days, some people talked about carbon and carbon sequestration and carbon capture. And I've got to tell you, in a lot of the water primary sector discussions, that's not being talked about so much. So that's a great example of where we need to talk about those things. And even years ago, I was seeing in one magazine, like a professional magazine, there was an article about capturing carbon and then putting it deep into the aquifers. At the same time, we're going to have to go deeper and look farther for water to serve. And it's like, okay, do we know we're doing these things if we're putting either brine from desalinated seawater or brackish water inland deep down, that we're not going to need that in the future? So I think that's a big, big question. I don't know the answer to it, but I think there's going to be a lot of work going on.
Well, it's actually the idea of cap and trade is to tax the emissions of corporations and bigger agriculture, and then spread that out and rebates back to the public who are not large contributors to the carbon problem.
Yeah, and cap and trade, which has been done for a long time in air pollution and the like, go back to the people policy and processes, because talking about taxing agriculture or things like that, people policy process.
We have time for one more question.
There's one down here. Well, yeah, because there's people on Zoom, though, I think they're yeah.
This is just a very basic question. I'm not a scientist. I just want to put this in perspective. If we did absolutely nothing right now, what's the prognosis, and how soon are we going to get hit with, a big crisis?
So some would say we're already in a crisis, so we're already there, and the question is how bad will it get, or will it worsen? But I'll answer that question in the context of what's going on with the Colorado River. And the Colorado River historically had supplied close to 40, if not more than 40% of Arizona's water supplies, either on river or through the constructed Central Arizona Project Canal. It's gone down. It's now 36%. The federal government, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, had indicated almost a year ago that we need to cut water deliveries of Colorado River water by 2 to 4 million acre-feet. And an acre-foot is about, what covers an acre of land 1 foot deep. It's about what covers a football field 1 foot deep. And this is above all the other cuts. And in June of last year, the Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner said in testimony in Congress to a question asked by, I think, our Senator Kelly from Arizona, this has to happen, and I want some response of the parties, the states, by August, in 2 months. It's like, wow. An ask like this has never been made, and let alone to look at something coming out of it in 2 months. Nothing happening. And, then it was, we want to work with the states. Then there seemed to be an end of January deadline, and the states have not been able to agree. So what the federal government did in March, April 11th? Yeah, April 11th, they put out, and they put it in the Federal Register a few days later, here are 3 options. We're not saying which one we favor, but one of them is the do nothing option. So I'm getting to the answer to your question. One is we keep with the rules for allocation that we have in place, and they're complex, they're not simple, depend on the level of Lake Mead and Lake Powell and all that kind of stuff. We'll do nothing. Option number 1, do nothing. The other 2 options are how you share the cutbacks. Everybody believes the do nothing alternative is not a choice. We have to do things, and we will do things. I'd just like to end by noting something others have said, is you can get really depressed thinking about the problems, right? And, you know, you can get blue and, like, this is just too much. But others will note, and you may be feeling both, you have to remain optimistic that people are going to come together and work on these things, because I think if you don't have some optimism, you won't have the right mindset to kind of keep working through these things so that things will change and improve. We have the supply side issues. There's also all the demand side issues. I just glossed over 2 words, you know, built environment. There's a lot of things in conservation we can do on the demand side, and I believe we will adapt because we have to. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Sharon.